Well, we can call to order and have a roll call. Everybody has the agenda. The agenda's been posted for meeting this evening at 7 o'clock on Zoom. Roll call: Gina Stino,
Present.
Mike Barclay,
Present.
Fran Collins,
Present.
Patrick Kennedy,
Here.
Mark Maggi,
I'm here.
Ellen Marr.
Present.
Mary McGoldrick is not going to be here, and I don't think Meg is either. So, and Rob Hillman is here, so we have 7, which is a quorum, which is a good
Did
thing.
you read your little spiel, Rob?
The spiel doesn't appear to be required anymore. The whole
okay.
recitation of the, and the special incantation and all of the above. At some point, maybe after the new year, we should talk about maybe just for the fun of it, having a live meeting, but not now. So I'd like to have at least one someday. So who's dialing in here? That might be Chris.
It's Chris.
Good. All right, so as I didn't say before, we have odds and ends on the warrant. Articles or parts of articles that we hadn't previously addressed to make our job a little bit more challenging. Our friends on the select board have moved some items around in which Mike was present for as well, in terms and capital budget have done some things. So there's some changes we're going to have to address. And then on we haven't touched Article 10 on wetlands protection. That's been approved by both the select board and the Concom. We'll be interested, maybe Patrick has something to tell us about that. And then the select board pretty much punted, no pun intended, on Article 15 on the navigation bylaw. And there does not appear to be an opinion for us to consider. And we can talk about what we want to do as a committee with respect to that. But I believe that the select board's conclusion was to defer their recommendation until they're not going to have a recommendation on the warrant. So why don't we start at the beginning? Chris, do you have a good record of what we look? I hate to sound this at sea, but what's out there for us to vote? We did quite a lot the last 2 meetings, but there are some items and whatnot. So I'm going to rely on you. And if you need any help, we'll dive into our notes and get this done. So why don't you dial us in here?
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Michelle, for starting the meeting. So Articles 1 and 2 are done. There's been a modification in Article 3. So as a result of some of the conversations that took place in front of this board and the select board, the Milliken Field article that was in the one-time cost was split into 2 pieces, and then it was transferred to the capital articles. And since all the money is coming from free cash, and because capital budget likes the money to flow through capital first, we just put the 150 into capital first. So it's the same amount of money being spent, just flowing in a slightly different way. So the article, which had 475 before, which you voted on unanimously, is now 625, because again, 150 is in that had been in the one-time cost article. That's going to get spent in the capital article. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me. And I'll just say this before anyone else who has a question about it can ask. I think if that's the case, we should probably look at the article defining the expenditure and then come back and revote this one. Does anybody have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I agree with you, Rob. I'm just trying to do the math. So this was the stuff that was transferred to Article 5, right, Chris?
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm just trying to do the math now, because I see the Millikins 130 in the version of Article 5 that I see today.
Right.
Okay.
So Article 4, so Article 4 is now the Milliken stuff that you hadn't voted on is now in Article 5. And Mike's also correct. The actual, and it's projects 11 and 12. You see here on the screen. And I think you got the warrant a little earlier today. Now 11 and 12 total 130. So I round up to keep capital happy. So I rounded up to 150. So it just means there's another 20,000 that will be available to them in the spring. And I made it an easier accounting number. 625 seemed easier than 605. Otherwise, you voted on all of these things. And actually, I'm sorry, you haven't voted on any of these things yet, but you've heard them all. The only one that Capital's paused on is the one that's highlighted in yellow. They're still waiting for more information, and they've asked Michelle to go back and see if she got a different price. And I think the schools need to provide a little bit more information. And this is plans so that a project can be bid to be funded in the spring to redo the Osgood School vestibule. It's the only school that doesn't have it's set up a little differently. Let's put it that way. Their vestibule is set up a little differently than the ones at the high school and Deer Hill. And they're looking to modify them to enhance visibility from the office. So that's the only one that Capital hasn't voted on. So they voted on all the others. And and you voted on all of them too, except for, I'm sorry, it's not 11 and 12, it's 10 and 12. The other one that's new is the Beechwood Playground repairs. And there's an article, there's a proposal that's kicking around in front of CPC. They meet on Monday, next Monday, to fund a rebuild of the playground at Beechwood. Capital said, well, that's great. If they don't fund the playground replacement, we'll give 30,000 to repairs. That 30,000 is for repairs. It's not to supplement any money that CPC was giving them. So if for whatever reason the CPC doesn't recommend the replacement of the playground, that would fund repairs. I think, and maybe the electric school bus, was that a new one too? I don't remember. Has that been kicked around? Is that new?
We have not discussed that.
New.
So
I
I
see some,
apologize for this like kind of hopping, skipping around.
yeah, we're gonna have to grind through this a little bit. I see some hands. Let's address the hands and then we'll decide what we need to discuss and what we need to vote on. So Ellen, then Mike, because I saw you both at the same time.
Okay, thanks. So this list is totals to 569,814. And last week it was 269,814. So it's a net increase of 300,000. But we just only added 150 to the capital stabilization fund.
Correct.
They decided to, some of this other's coming out, you're right. And there's other things in our they added like the elevator. So what they've decided to do is fund that fully, and then 65,000 that advisory put in would come back to you. It would go back into the reserve fund if this is approved at town meeting. They decided to pay for the whole thing. And that was also not something you had seen before. So that's 100 of that, or almost 100 of that. And then the school bus wasn't on there before either. That kind of jumped in. That's a town's match for a grant that would get the town its first fully electric school bus. That said, whether or not that moves forward is in front of the school committee tonight. So if they vote in favor of it, it'll go forward. If they don't, then it won't. But advisory said, fine, 25 doesn't make sense. It's economically viable. And it's a small match for a bus that would normally cost $375,000.
So right now we're plus 150 on the spend.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the only thing because the other one was already funded.
What other one?
The Milliken had already been funded in the free cash, up in the Milliken was already potentially being funded with free cash in the one-time costs. They asked me to follow money, to move the money from down to that. And I said, fine, it's the same money. But the other projects are coming out of the fund as it is, so we're not
But
funding.
we didn't vote when it was back in front of us before, unless I'm mistaken. The Milliken project was consolidated with a reference to field study money, and we had asked that they be unpacked. And I assume then that they have been. Where does that show up?
So if you see here, Rob, I'm putting.
Milliken is number
10.
512.
Yeah, 10
Go
is
ahead.
the study. If you see
Got it.
Article 5.
And
And
then 12 is the,
is
the
the
construction
rest.
project.
Yeah, correct. So they were
Okay,
unpacked.
all right.
They were split to
that's
two.
where they live. Okay, so, Mike, you had your hand up as well?
Yeah, and if I could, having been on the Capitol meeting on Monday, maybe just share some of the sentiment that came out of that. And I apologize, I was not here last week. But we had the field study was originally 322,500 coming out of the one-time costs. But just to talk through some of these new articles that are before us and how the Capitol group felt about them, starting with the vestibule at Osgood, no one debates at all that something needs to be done. I think the tone of Capitol was that there are two bids for 50,000, and some of the sentiment on the Capitol committee was just that not all the options had been vetted. They didn't really feel like they had the full range of options presented to them. But they were willing to, but they wanted to fund something to move forward because it is important. The Beechwood Playground, again, that was something that one of the members said on Monday night that the first time they'd heard about it was 4 days before that. Apparently, there's been some study done, and the parts of the Beechwood Playground have been deemed unsafe, although that's, at least as of Monday night, that was not in writing. That was I guess somebody had inspected it, even though Ralph Dormitzer went out and looked at every single bolt on the playground and felt like it was in good shape. But again, they were willing to go forward with the 30,000 on the premise that whoever looked at it had deemed it unsafe. And then, let's see, Milliken concession, I don't think there was any controversy about that. The field study was not unanimous by Capitol. They had said that, I guess there was 40,000 spent already, plus this additional 30 that we're looking at in item number 10 right now. And again, just, I think there was some sentiment that they just didn't have all the information and were wondering why the cost was what it was. So that's just, and Chris referenced the elevator, which was just moving 65 back into our sort of emergency fund, and Capitol was going to take care of the whole thing, which will also put it back into service for the 95,000. So that's just, I'm just echoing the sentiment that I heard on the Capitol meeting on Monday night when they considered some of these items.
Fran, and then Jean.
I heard it, and I can't tell you specifically who told me, but there was another plan afoot to rebuild the Beechwood ballpark, the Beechwood playground. We just rebuilt that several years ago, and I can't understand why anybody would want to spend, $500,000 or more to rebuild the Beechwood ballpark again. I don't know if Chris, if you've heard anything about that, or is this something that's going to come up in the near future? Or?
Well, it's not the ballpark, it's the playground.
Well, we always call it Beechwood Ballpark. But
Yeah, right. I mean, you're right. But the playground itself is, it's more than, I want to say 27 years old, something like that. And it's kind of at the end of its natural life, typically for playgrounds. Standards change over time. Things that, there are things that some of us played on as kids that are no longer considered safe for playgrounds. I'm not going to get into that level of detail. That said, there's a group in the Beechwood community that says, hey, we'd really like to replace this. We really think it's time. And they're in front of CPC. They're going in front of CPC again on Monday to make that case. And that would be using community preservation dollars. You'll see that before town meeting, based on what CPC does. You'll have another meeting before town meeting, and that presentation will come to you then. The money that's in the capital is solely for repairs, because there are some things that need to be repaired. Ralph's due diligence aside, a certified playground inspector did look at it, and there are things that need to be adjusted. I don't have that list. Michelle has a whole list of these things. Just to bring it up for safety purposes. And that's about 30,000. If there isn't a move to replace the playground, that 30,000 could go to do some of those repairs to keep the playground in usable shape. Does that kind of answer your question, Fran?
Yeah, thanks. No repair. I have no issue with the repairs. I mean, things do wear out, things have to be fixed. But I just was kind of taken aback when someone's, we got to build a whole new playground. That just doesn't make good sense to me at all. Thank you.
Okay, Ellen?
Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jean, then Ellen.
In 2018-19, I believe it was, we reviewed all of the playgrounds. And as I recall, the only thing that was needed at Beechwood, and I live in Beechwood, so there you go, but I don't go to playgrounds anymore, thankfully. The only thing that was really needed was different type of ground cover and perhaps a handicap swing. And I'm not sure if that was done at that time. But otherwise, the play items that are there seem to be in pretty good condition. Although it is very highly frequented. So maybe something's worn out, I don't know. But as early as 5 or 6 years ago, it was reviewed, and Ellen can probably, recall some of it also, because she was on the school committee at the same time as I was. We had to redo parts of the Deer Hill School, which was brand new, and there was a new law that somebody had pushed for, and we had to do a lot of work on a playground that had just been completed.
Oh, good.
So all of the playgrounds were kind of under the microscope at that time.
Okay, Ellen, I see your hand back up.
So under the free cash, we have 15,000 for various playground repairs. Is that for, what are the other playgrounds? Deer Hill, Osgood, and the recreation department?
Yeah, there's other things. So going forward, so one of the things we're taking a very hard look at is how these should be maintained going forward. So Rec did have a certified playground inspector. They don't now. So what we're going to do is we're going to have someone in facilities become a certified playground inspector for starters, and then we're going to build into the facilities budget money every year to do just routine stuff. We're replacing the seat for a swing, replacing the chains, replacing, just like you do for a building, right? You have, those can get beat on pretty hard. They're out in the all weather, right? They're in the weather all the time, and while they're built fairly tough, things do wear down and get rust. So it's been a little bit more. They get built, they're great, and then, so we're building a new maintenance plan. So that 15,000 is for all the playgrounds, right? It's not for Beechwood particularly, actually. It's for for facilities to replace, again, like a swing. I think there's one of the playgrounds I think is missing a swing seat right now in one of the things, and it's things like that. And it'll give them money for the rest of this fiscal year, and then we'll plan to build in money for the next year. And we've applied for a grant to fund the training to get us facilities person to become a certified playground inspector, because we really should have one on staff. It's just a good idea.
Jean?
Word of caution, when you're doing this, all of our playgrounds, or at least the Deer Hill School, anyway, let's just say that, they totally rebuilt the one at Osgood. But the Deer Hill School had been inspected and passed the state inspection. And then something else popped up that was brought up by a parent in another town. So just make sure that we're on board on all the bases instead of just one or two. We need to make sure that we're doing it all the right way so that we don't have to redo anything after it's already spent.
Thank you, Gene. That's one of the reasons we want to have someone on staff who's certified in this stuff, who's up to code today. Because sometimes this can change. I mean, it's like what changes at educational standards in the schools, right? Something that may have been perfectly fine 5 years ago, suddenly it's like, well, we should do things a little bit differently today.
But it was perfectly fine with the state, Chris. That's my point.
No, I know, I remember that, Gene. I remember
Oh, you were there.
I was there, and all of a sudden the playground surfaces were not okay.
Right.
Because the state has a stricter rule than the feds do. They've now since softened, which is one of the reasons we're okay. That said, that was for the surface, so. But,
It was the surfaces and the ADA equipment.
right, right. There are certain pieces that had to be more accessible.
Right.
And by the way, there is a handicap swing. I'm almost certain I saw it today at Beechwood. I'm almost certain there's a handicap swing.
I think it was all done at the same time. I really do.
All right, so we've walked through it. It seems to me there are quite a few things we need to make sure that we appropriately voted on. And it's not, they're not they're not sort of self-evident, but it seems to me maybe we could vote on the amended Article 3 if everyone has some clarity on where money got moved in and moved out. And then we can go down and go through the various open and changed items in Article 5.
Mike had his hand up too. Mike, I think you just.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I
I just didn't see it.
do you want me to have it here? You want to bring him? I'll bring him up.
Yeah, please. Oh, Mike Dick.
Mike Dick, yeah.
Okay, this is Mike Barclay.
No,
Sure,
no.
if he's got something
his
that
hand
we
up,
need to
so
know, I'm
there.
happy to hear from him.
There he is. He's coming in.
But I just want to give you a little bit more information on what capital budget did on this Article 5, Project 8. The initial request was for a couple of $100,000 that went before CPC to do two things. One was to repair the swing equipment and slides that are at the Beechwood Playground. There's two structures there. The second was to replace the surface, which is now wood chips to a depth of 10 inches, with a rubberized surface to make it easier for disability wheelchairs and so on. I looked at the playground, Ralph looked at the playground equipment, and we both felt that it was in really good condition. And so we reviewed the document that Michelle brought, where a consultant showed us pictures of things that needed to be replaced. And with that information, we said, okay, fine, let's repair it. You know, this is good proof that yes, these things need to be replaced. We felt that replacing the surface at this time is probably not a good spend. If CPC wants to spend the money, that's their call. But I'm bringing this to you for your deliberations as advisory to understand that capital budget felt that the repairs are warranted. A surface which is not now required, but may be required in the future, was not warranted. So with that, I'll thank you for listening, and I'll drop off.
Thanks. Fran?
I think you just explained what part of my problem is. I was assuming we were talking about the entire playing area. That's the whole, the ball field and the whole works. We're just talking about the area with that has the swings and the slides and the mechanical devices for the kids to play on. So that's a whole different ball game. All right, thank you for that clarification, even though you didn't know you were giving it.
Okay. Anything further? So I had suggested that it might make sense just to keep our record clear that we revote Article 3 in its current in its current iteration, and then move on and talk our way through what's next. Does that work for everybody? So then I guess we're looking for a motion in the form of, does the advisory committee recommend the town meeting approve Article 3 of the warrant in the form it appears as of November 2nd, 2022.
So moved.
Mike, a second?
Second.
Fran, any more discussion? Hearing none, vote by roll call, Gina Stino,
Aye.
Mike Barclay,
Aye.
Fran Collins,
Aye.
Patrick Kennedy. Aye. Mark Maggi,
Aye.
Ellen Mar,
Aye.
and Rob Hillman is an aye. So Article 3 is voted. Article 4, Chris, I think we've voted everything on here unless there are any changes.
The only change are things you didn't vote on. So the things that you didn't vote on are pulled off of here. So you voted on all the rest of it. So.
Okay, that's easy. So
This
if
is
I,
good.
yeah, if I'd been a little bit more nimble, I would have said, anything, if we voted on everything that's on here, and we have. So, moving on then. Article 5, there's some changes to Article 5. Can you just, remind us again, and with respect to the Osgood, well, also the select board had a spree of votes both 2 weeks ago and last night, a week and a half, the prior week and last night. And I'm not sure any changes they made. Can we just go through Article 5 and isolate what, if anything, we have not yet voted
So
on? And
you haven't
then we'll
voted on
just-
this article at all. So you've talked about it, but you hadn't
There
voted on
it
any
is.
of the
Okay,
pieces.
that's easy.
You
right.
haven't voted on any of the pieces. So the electric vehicles have been heard before. The police radios have been heard before. Those have been voted by capital early in the process. You've heard about the Osgood School vestibule, and that's being held for town meeting recommendation. And that's both.
When you say it's being held for town meeting recommendation, it's by the select board?
No, it was the capital budget said they're going to recommend a town meeting. So the select board decided to wait as well. And that
Right.
they're going to wait for capital's recommendation. Now, by the way, when I said town meeting, they could very well decide on this in the next week or two. But the vote, the
It won't be
recommendation,
on the warrant.
right, it won't be in the warrant, it'll appear in the motions. All right, that's the goal. The police cameras, so that's project number 3, and you've already heard Mike explain that in more depth. Project 4 had already been approved early in the process. Article 5 had been approved early in the process. Article 6 had been approved later in the process, but this is to fix an older project that hadn't been fully funded. The Beechwood water main is extra money they needed to cover bids that came in high. But that project itself had already been approved by town meeting. The elevator you know about, this is just capital funding it which would then put 65,000 that advisory took out of the reserve fund back in August. That will go back into the reserve fund should this article pass. And the other 30 will pay to recommission the elevator. So that'll pay to put the new jack in that'll make the elevator functional again. The electric school bus, there's been lots of presentations. I apologize that hasn't come to advisory. Tanya Bedell, I think, has been on the circuit, riding the circuit, giving presentations about the electric school bus. And it's a pilot project for us. This company that's making it, we did have to go to bid, so it was bid out. But this company really wants to pioneer. They're trying to break into the electric school bus market in Massachusetts, so we're getting a very good deal on this bus. This is the town's match. So again, the school committee is hearing that tonight.
Is that a buy or a lease, Chris?
It's a lease. It's a lease. As Mark Maggi pointed out with cars, I think there's even more skepticism about owning a long-term bus because there's even more batteries in a bus than are on a car. So I don't think there's any. I don't think the town is looking. I do not believe that the vote will be to buy. I think it'll be the lease, and not even so. But again, they're voting on that time, the school committee. The Milliken Field study we had discussed, that's the broken out piece. The Beechwood Playground.
Well,
repairs.
we discussed breaking it out. I don't think we
Right.
discussed it, but
I'm sorry.
we'll get to it.
All
Yeah,
right, so there's been a field study had been funded last year. If you recall a town meeting, the study took place, there were public meetings. A bunch of proposals have been presented. And there's an ongoing conversation among the boards and committees, including select board and rec and others, about what's the right path. Milliken seems to be the most likely place to do some upgrades. Number one, because it's large. Number two, it's town owned as opposed to school owned. Because even though the schools clearly have field space, because their focus right now is on the potential rebuild or replacement of the middle high school, their focus is really on that. So, and where that might go. So fields are not on school property are not are something that's going to be part of that larger conversation. That said, the study, rather than present a plan right now, the decision was, the recommendation of the select board is now to say, look, it's a big deal for the town. We need to keep a little bit money in the kitty to be able to pay our consultant to be able to come up with some more plans and diagrams, and then potentially get us far enough, if there's a community desire, for spring to consider a bigger plan. So that will just supplement the work that's already been done. I don't know that we'll necessarily spend 30,000 at all. It really depends on what the conversations that take place this winter. And I see Mike's hand up, so I don't know if it's about this.
Well,
Yeah, no,
I
I'm sorry,
think what
Chris. Oh, I'm sorry, Chris, just topic for another discussion, but just in general, there's a lot of consultants doing a lot of things in town. And I would love at some point to understand how their revenue model works, how they bill the town, and then in situations where they may be bidding for the work as well, sort of how that might work into it. It's just, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. It's just it's a question that, because I keep hearing in a lot of different places, we have consultants working on things, and I would love to understand at some point what the relationship of the consultants are, how they bill the town. Is it off of hourly? Is it based on the size of the project and things like that? So topic for another discussion, but since I heard the word consultant, I thought I would, while it was still in my head, I'd bring that up. Thanks.
What I can answer generally is that we follow procurement practices under state law. So Michelle's certified procurement officer, SMI. And so most of the times we hire somebody for projects like this, it's task-based. Get us get us this. It's not our, lawyers tend to be hourly, right? For things like this, it's more like, look at these things that come back to us and do these, 3 public meetings are in the mix, or, this much consultation. It's not, now, there's an hourly rate behind that stuff. That said, there's usually a cap, like we'll spend only up to this amount of money, and this is what you need to give us.
I think what Mike was suggesting is that we expand on that further when we're not trying to deal with a warrant. I think we should. I think a related discussion is how, these projects get staffed with consultants, and all of a sudden, without any prior vetting or meaningful prior vetting in the various committees that are charged with these sorts of things, 6, 7, 8 figure proposals are all of a sudden in play. And well, we've spent all this money getting the plans ready, so here we go. I'm uncomfortable with that. When we get to the field study, I've got a couple of comments, but I won't make those now. So the Beechwood Playground, I think we just discussed, and the Milliken concessions, I think we did actually vet reasonably last time we were out. I think the only thing between us and approving it was the unpacking the portion of it that was field study. So Ellen, and then we'll go back and start to claw through these things one or two or three at a time. Ellen?
Okay, so when we talked about the Milliken concession stand building project last time, there was a mention of previously appropriated money. And I went back through my town warrants. I think in special town meeting of 2018, CPC gave this project like $157,000. Does that money expire? Or does it just keep rolling on and on for projects?
No, money has to be renewed, Ellen. It's usually good for 3 years. This money has been rolled over by town meeting at least once in the past. I believe its current expiration date is next spring. I don't have it in front of me, but I believe we renewed until 23. Typically, it's 3 years. Typically, a CPC project ages out after 3 years, and if it's not spent, it gets reverted. That said, they can be renewed. In this case, some of that money actually went to the field, the baseball field, and some other things related to the field. There's a baseball field on Milliken too, and unfortunately, the building still was, the primary goal of this was new bathrooms or permanent bathrooms on there. So that's still the goal.
Thank you.
Okay. I think probably the best way to go down this is to kind of straw poll each of the ones, each of these items, and then come up with a vote. So, and if anybody, let's just try it, see how it works. The electric vehicles, which we discussed at some length earlier, does anyone have any further questions or comments relating to that?
No,
No. Police radios? No.
no.
The Osgood vestibule, do we want to follow suit and defer on this, or Chris, do you have a recommendation?
Because I think it's fair to defer this because there's a process in place to get more information, and once Capital has that, then I think it'll bring more clarity to the situation. So I think deferring this is a fair approach.
Okay.
Defer.
How do I say this nicely? I have enormous respect and affection for our capital budget committee, all of its prior, current, and future members. But sometimes they dawdle and spend a lot of time looking at minutiae, which is good. That's their job. I'm all for it. Are there substantive issues with this $40,000 that we should wait for, or is this somebody looking for a price on X?
Again, I think Mike explained it, or Mike Dick can explain directly.
Since that was something just short of a personal insult to Mike Dick, I think we should let him respond.
I'm
Mike?
going to stay out of this entirely.
I made it clear how much I like them. Mike, what's up with that? Is that something we should
It's
pump
definitely
brakes
just
on?
short. It's just short. Our concern is that what we have is a $230,000 project to solve the problem of giving more visibility to the secure entry space.
Yeah, I don't think we want to talk about building security in a public meeting. That's
Fair enough.
That's an
Fair
OML
enough.
issue.
But
Yeah.
I just want to say that our concern is there may be far less expensive approaches to solving the problem. So that's why we want somebody to tell us, is there a smarter, better way to achieve the same end?
Okay, can I ask another question?
Yeah.
Does the school committee vote on this? It's a building that has their name on
I don't know.
it. Ellen has her hand up.
Yeah, the school committee, as a matter of course, would vote on all projects, that they're putting forth to capital. I'm kind of curious as to how this came up, because some years ago, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, we did do vestibule enhancements at Osgood School. And I can speak about them because they've been done and they're public, and the key to security in a school vestibule is have access in and then a barrier, and have an identification device such as a Raptor machine or a lobby guard, so that a visitor has to register in and then get buzzed in through the interior doors into the building, so that the visitor is verified. And we put cameras in the vestibule. So the money was appropriated to replace the interior doors so that they were locking and could not be accessed from the outside without being buzzed in, to add the cameras, and to ensure that the lobby guard that was there was connected into the main office where the secretary sits. So I'm kind of curious as to where the genesis for this new project came from.
I
Mr.
think-
Chairman, may I answer?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Ellen, what we heard was that AI3 recommended adding a vestibule to the vestibule.
Okay.
And that's why we have this very large project.
Who is AI3?
AI3 is a
Consultant?
consulting firm who specializes in school facilities. Coincidentally, not related, but coincidentally, AI3 is doing our study for the school building administration
Oh, okay.
project,
Of interest, okay.
right?
Then
Um,
I think, I'm sorry, Mike, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Yeah. So AI3 is recommending an observation window that
Again,
allows.
I'm really not comfortable talking about the recommendations that have not yet been installed. This isn't an area of the open meeting law that I'm particularly expert in, but I think that details of security in any public building are not met. I think we've heard enough, subject to
Good, and
everyone
that's-
else's thinking.
That's what we're
that
all here for.
We should, that I'm happy that capital budgets concerns are, as they always are, spot on. The select board has decided to follow that. We haven't heard anything from the school committee. The last time the school committee had a access security concern, they came to us. I think it was actually, that was a reserve fund transfer, but still. So unless anybody objects, I would put 3 down for a deferral and move on.
I would just say that if the subcommittee, your subcommittee, Rob, might want to reach out to the school's counterpart just to get some more information, because that's where this has been coming from. I think they have a security subcommittee or something like that, so.
Excellent, good. If our subcommittee is inclined to do so, Jane, Ellen, and when Mary gets back. All right, so police interview cameras. I recall discussing those and there were no objections. Anybody have any questions or comments? Hearing none. Public safety generator. I recall Chris making the point that that is perhaps close to the last place in town we want to not have electricity. Anything further on that? No. The HVAC upgrades, we discussed those. Anybody have any further questions? No. The Beechwood water main. I think after the events of this week, we're all about maintaining water mains. Anything further there? Seeing nothing. Town hall elevator, and we're putting money back in our reserve fund. What could be better? Anything? No. We have not discussed the electric school bus. I did listen to the select board's meeting last night. Tanya Bodell was there for a good while, making a very thorough and informative presentation that I think included this, but I recall Chris saying that, $25,000 gets us a lot of value in another grant program. Does anybody have further questions for Chris or want to discuss it at all? Go, Mike.
Yeah, we need doesn't the school committee need to vote on the lease for this money to then be expended?
Yeah, they're voting tonight on whether to move forward with the project.
Right.
So,
So if they vote against it, we won't need this. So I guess this would be subject to the school committee's approval of the lease.
yes,
Okay.
God, they may have even voted by now. They're meeting, well, the night is young, but they're meeting concurrently with us. So I think we can vote it, and if the school committee doesn't vote it, it'll be struck.
it'll be stricken
So,
anyway.
Mark,
Just real quick, who is if I can ask this, who's the manufacturer of this electric school bus? And does this thing exist or is it like vaporware?
It's gonna be, it's a real company that does work in other states. Mark, I can have Michelle send you all the materials. They may even be up on the website right now.
Okay, I can check.
It's a real company that does this in other states. I don't remember the name of them, to be honest. Michelle's actually been the lead on this for my office, and So, and again, by the way, I do apologize for the somewhat frayed nature of this. This has been all coming together kind of last minute. I don't like to do that to anybody. That said, if I can find something now, I'll have it sent to you right now.
Okay, I'll keep an eye out. Thanks. Just curious. There's a lot of companies trying to get into this space, and some of them are more real than others.
Vaporware. Any further questions, comments about the electric school bus? Sounds like a PBS children's show. Moving on, the Milliken Field Study. $30,000 is a teacher's aide's annual salary. It isn't beanbag. It's not no money. And I'll say this, and maybe we just move on if nobody else is interested in it, but I found everything about this field study to be frustrating. It seemed like a good idea to have a study. We commissioned a study. The study was thorough. The study went out and looked at every piece of available and unavailable land in town on which to put every kind of permutation of recreational facilities. All good so far, but has any committee come to us and said, this is the plan, this is where we're going? I've heard some, in watching other meetings, some nosebleed level potential costs for the plans that these studies are going to support. And simultaneously, there's been a discussion about coming up with a long-term capital planning tool for the town, yet between fields and a statement of interest to the Mass School Building Authority for what could be a 9-figure project. These things continue to sort of go forward. This one I'm really uncomfortable with. I'm not sure that not recommending the $30,000 is quite the way to go, but I just feel like I have now vented. So, and I see Mike's hand up, so I'll pass it off to him and then Patrick, and then we'll continue.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd echo your sentiments there, Rob, and I was on my phone for the Capitol meeting, so I don't know if Mike Dick is still on the line. I believe they approved it, although it wasn't unanimous, and for a lot of the reasons you're expressing, they felt the same way. And I think this 30,000 was just to quote, keep the consultant engaged, which I guess I'm not really sure what that means. And there's the presumption of this leading to a recommendation for a rather large expenditure and so I mean, if the Capital Committee approved it, and I know they deliberated on it, and so just for that reason, I would weigh in and recommend it also because Capital has looked at it and vetted it. But you bring up some very valid points around this, Rob, that I think we need to vet better in the coming weeks and months.
I thank you. I saw Patrick and then Chris, and I would be interested in Mike Dick if he's still with us, and he appears to be responding to what Mike Barclay just said. So Patrick.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I'm in favor of spending money on project improvements and upgrades to facilities that are needed and that there's real costs and a real need justified. I'm not in favor of spending more money on consultants to come up with possible plans. Like I think this item had at one point on this article at prior meetings, much more money for a plan that would include 65 parking spaces down a cul-de-sac and behind the field, which was completely infeasible for so many reasons and would have just garnered so much neighborhood dissatisfaction and opposition that it never would have passed. So I'm not in favor of spending more consultant money coming up with plans that will go nowhere. I'm in favor of spending money on real upgrades to facilities that are needed. I would rather spend this money on put it towards resurfacing and regrading those tennis courts at Milliken, which have been needed for many, many years. I know it's a much bigger number, but put this money in and do the work. That's what I'll say. Thanks.
Chris and then Mike Dick.
I don't want to beat this horse too much more. This has been a community goal through the select board for this entire season this year and into last. There's been a lot of community conversations about the need to expand and enhance the town's recreational opportunities, not just for youth, but also for adults, pickleball, soccer, lacrosse, field hockey. Cohasset has a pretty small, its geography and everything else. I mean, everyone who's lived here. This Milliken is the primary field complex in the town of Cohasset. It's not very big. And the tennis courts are clearly in need of restoration or rebuilding. The money for this is to fund more community conversation to see if a Milliken plan, which is where this seems to be gelling right now, can be pulled together. Community meetings can be had, and the community can make a decision as to whether or not it wants to move forward. That just wasn't able to happen in time. And you're right, Patrick, those are much bigger numbers. It was too big and too early to have that, to put that in front of anybody. These funds, and again, the 30,000 is a number up to, the goal is not to spend 30,000 further. It's just to allow the technical expertise available to do work, and then to hold community meetings with experts to be able to talk about, you know, what the right answer is, and then potentially to get a package together, see if people want to do it. And then to put that potentially in front of the voters in the spring. When I say the voters, I mean town meeting, and perhaps a funding source. So that's what that funding is for. So I understand the communities, I understand the conversation. There's been a very intense public conversation involving baseball and everything else. This is a continuation of that. It started before the pandemic. It stopped during the pandemic, and now I think it's getting to a point where there's going to be enough of a concrete conversation. If any of you have not seen the study and all the conversations that come out of it, it's on the town's website. I can have it forwarded to all of you. And if you'd like a presentation, I'm happy to have Michelle come in one night and give you everything you want to know about where we are in fields, because there's a lot of community conversation that's gone on over the last 12 months.
Mike, Dick, and then Ellen, I'll say I have seen it, but I think sending it all to us, and to Mike Barclay's point and Patrick's point to some extent, even my own point, is even if we do follow suit with our other committees and approve this money to be available for the purposes that Chris outlined, I think we have an advisory meeting where this is topic one very shortly after the town meeting, and get a better notion of lots of things. So Ellen, go ahead. I'm sorry, Mike, and then Ellen.
I'd echo what Chris said, especially in our committee wanting to support the select board in their goals. And it was not a unanimous vote. It was 3-0 and 1. But the study should at least wrap up or conclude in some fashion until a fiscal planning group can, and we discussed this as well in our meeting, get the planning group to include these field development and construction as part of our overall list. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. And Ellen?
So I think, you know, for those of us who've been around, I think we all agree that, you know, we are short of fields in every arena, whether it's baseball, softball, tennis, pickleball, lacrosse, field hockey, whatever it is. I'm not sure we needed a study to tell us that. We did it in 2008 and 2009 when we put the turf field in. We did a complete analysis, time use, participant rate, how the frequency of non-playability on grass fields versus turf fields. So we had all that data, and we knew we didn't have enough field space, but having a turf field would give us more hours of usage. But I'm going to go back, and again, it's probably not for tonight, to something Mark said last week. And he's talked about, you know, deferring projects. And we have so many looming between potentially a new middle high school, town hall renovation, or new build. There's talk about public safety building. and field use. And I think of what Situate did a few years back, where they did everything in one fell swoop. And they did the new middle school, they did all of those beautiful fields behind the middle high school complex, and they did public safety all in 1 year, all in one town meeting. And they, ate the debt exclusion, the override. And I think we need to wrap our arms around everything we need to do as a town. And because if we piecemeal it, it's going to not make the best use of our resources or our space, which is so limited. And that's all I wanted to say.
Any other comments relating to number 10? I'm going to suggest that, notwithstanding my petulant outburst of a few moments ago, that unless anyone else is interested in splitting a vote on this, I'll go along with it. Or we can break it out like capital budget did if there's any anybody who wants to demur on it. Fran?
It'd be nice to know what all these consultants have come up with so far. This is just a sort of a placeholder so we can keep this guy or these people on the hook. I think we need to have some sort of a report as to where they are and what have they got.
I think Chris and Mike's point were that, and Chris, correct me if I misheard you, is that they're not proposing to spend $30,000, or proposing to have $30,000 available for a process to get to next town meeting, where it feels a lot like we're going to see a big proposal. And that would be where the money would be applied, so that that could get vetted and presented, in its sort of large format. So it's not money for nothing. I don't think it wouldn't be. Chris wouldn't be standing in front of us if it were. But I do think that we should have a meeting, like I said, shortly after the new year, and get a presentation on this and the application of these consulting fees, and what are the proposed projects, and what are the magnitudes of what Springtown meeting is likely to look like if they want to rebuild all kinds of things on Milliken, which may be convincing and may be good. It's just we need to be prepared. Ellen, I see your hand up. Is it up again or still up? Okay. So
just to
Chris,
Chris,
go ahead.
if I might, for all of you, there's a bunch of materials on the town's website. They're on the select board's page, under their goals page. So there's, friend, that whole study came out last year. It's there. They looked at a lot of locations in town were looked at. They looked at every piece of land that we owned or didn't own that could conceivably hold fields. Analysis was done, and there's some proposals. So there's like 5 different options for a variety of things. So that's on the town's website. I'm happy if you want to stop by the office, we can print it out for you. But it's also available online.
I'll try and dig it out. If I can't dig it out, I'll be up to see you.
Okay, so there was a lot of work done, and there were public meetings on this. So it's and by the way, just to circle back to the prior one for just a second, I just sent all of you an email with a part of the presentation on the school buses, and marked the company as NLX, ENEL-X. That's the company for the school bus. So you now all have that information too.
Thank you.
0 to 60 in 3.8 seconds. That's the all right. Hearing nothing, I'll just continue on from 10 to 11. The Beechwood Playground repairs. Just very briefly, Chris, what's the interplay between this and what CPC might do?
The interplay is it's an either or.
Okay, so isn't it?
not both.
It's not so much either or. It'd be this one, but if CPC votes to fund it, this one will go away.
Correct.
Right.
Right,
That's what I thought.
Yes.
Does anybody have any other questions about that? It seems sensible. And then the Milliken, number 12, we discussed, and I think had consensus about last week. So unless anybody has anything further, I propose a motion that the advisory committee recommend that town meeting approve Article 5 substantially in the form that it appears in the November 2nd, 2022 warrant, except that as to item number 3, the advisory committee defers a recommendation. Anybody want to make that motion?
So moved.
Fran? I saw Fran first, but Mike jumped into second.
I have one more quick question before.
Yeah,
we
go
go.
ahead. The
You know,
discussion is,
The Milliken restrooms concession, we want to build a full-time public toilet facility. Is that the idea?
It's the idea.
Now, I go to a lot of athletic events with grandchildren and my own kids. They're not playing anymore, but over the years, and most of the schools I go to and very affluent towns in many cases, they all seem to use porta potties. And I'm concerned that if we build a full-time restroom, what's the vandalism protection, and what do we do about freezing? And I mean, there's a whole lot to be said about having a dedicated facility, and I think it's lovely to have clean restrooms. Nobody won't have an issue with that, but well-maintained porta potties seem to be a better alternative. And has that been discussed? And if so, what's the?
So again, without belaboring this, the answer is yes, and they don't work. It's very difficult for someone who's handicapped to use them, Fran. We don't have fancy ones. They're really old school. It's very hard to put a small kid in those things. And if you're trying to bring a young kid, these would be, and by the way, they wouldn't be open to the public all the time. They'd be locked when they're not, so I don't want them to, when they have to be closed and maintained, right? So they'll be open during games. When they're not open, if you're going to walk your dog, they're not going to be open for you to go in there. That's not the plan. So they stay safe and they stay clean. And we're going to have to obviously maintain them properly and clean them. So that'll be
And heat them.
part of, well, yeah, they'll have to be warmed at least, they're not going to be full-blown heaters in there, but like an HVAC system, but they'll have to be, we don't want the pipes to freeze in the winter, and we don't want them to, boil in the summer. They're going to be individual use bathrooms, and that's just the way of the world now. They'll be, I think they're trying to get as many individual use bathrooms, at least one being fully handicapped accessible, so that, you'd have a changing table and a stall, and, but they're individual. You could like bring a kid in there if you needed to for a little kid or something, but they're individual use. They're not like a ladies' room and a men's room anymore. Those days for public bathrooms are
and
gone.
I have some sympathy for the people who live across the street, all of whom I'm acquainted with, but, getting up every day and staring at a couple of plastic portable facilities, come on, it's if nothing else, they're only building in the same building envelope that's presently there. And there's a whole different conversation with that, but,
If we're worried about vandalism, porta potties are just as easy to push over as bathrooms are to vandalize. We've got
thanks for that image.
we've got plumbing and bathrooms at the baseball field, and I don't think that's been a problem. I think
That's good, that's an excellent point.
I think real bathrooms and plumbing at our largest field complex is something we should seriously consider over, porta johns.
Okay.
And we did try to find the really fancy ones, the ones just sometimes like that weddings and stuff that are in fields. We can't even get them. They're like back ordered for a year. So we want to rent one for the next year. Michelle tried everywhere, and she couldn't get her hands on one of the fancy ones. So we've exhausted all opportunities.
Okay.
Gene?
Yeah, I just wanted to note that Ellen actually sent around the Milliken field plan on the 19th to all of us. So it should be in your email from October 19th.
You go back.
Was that the big plan or just the plan relating to this building?
It was a PowerPoint of all the fields.
This is just a very tiny part of that, but I do remember that. I was interested in it, so.
Yep, there it is.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We've had some conversation. Does anybody have anything further, or do we just want to vote Article 5 with its amendation? Hearing none, vote by roll call. Gina Stino,
Aye.
Mike Barclay,
Aye.
Fran Collins,
Aye.
Patrick Kennedy,
I with an asterisk.
Mark Maggi,
Aye, no asterisks.
Ellen Mar,
Aye.
And Rob Hillman, I will join in the asterisk, but that's the ayes have it, and we're approved with that one exception. Which brings us to Article 6, CPC. Where are we at with this, Chris?
I muted myself, sorry. The CPC is meeting Monday. So that's gonna have to be, this won't be ready until your next meeting, so it won't make, the recommendations
All right.
won't warrant, I'm afraid. But the
Okay.
articles,
So
the articles on the warrant. So,
Okay, so we'll defer. I don't feel comfortable voting on it until they vote on it. It makes no sense, particularly with CPC. So we'll put us down as a deferral. 7, we approved. 8, we approved. 9, we approved. 10, wetlands protection bylaw. There was a short presentation to the select board last night, and they voted to approve it. The Concom has approved it. Patrick, do you have any input on this?
Yeah, a little bit of input. I've reviewed the changes that are proposed in detail. And I tried to reach out, I did reach out to the Concom chair, but wasn't able to connect with him before this meeting. But essentially, it's definitional changes that give the Concom a little bit more legs for reviewing applications that could have impacts on riverfront areas and development opportunities where there might be a wet area that they could deem a vernal pool. I think the changes are pretty much clarifying for the riverfront area. The vernal pool, it's a little bit more of a wholesale definitional change. If you read it, there is one aspect of it that I think is pretty subject to interpretation, and that is like, if you look at the third line, so if you look at the vernal pool language, the new language is that it includes, quote, confined basin or depression not occurring in existing lawns, gardens, landscaped areas, or driveways. So it's those areas that are not otherwise improved as of now, which, quote, at least in most years, holds water for a minimum of 2 continuous months between December and June, is free of blah, blah, blah. So in most years, that is so vague.
There's a lot of room for fact development under.
Is
under
that
this.
most years in 10 years, most years in 100 years? Is it every year? Is 2 out of 3 good enough when it doesn't happen in 7 in a row? So anyway, I think there's it's pretty vague, but it may be subject to challenge down the road. But in all, I agree with these changes. I think it's going to give Concom a little bit more clarity in their review of projects that could have adverse impacts on wetland areas. So I'm in favor of it.
Okay. How about, I know this probably requires more discussion, but why don't I frame a motion in a second, and then we'll have discussion on it. So can I have a motion that the advisory committee recommend the town meeting approve Article 10 in substantially the form that appears in the draft warrant dated November 2, 2022.
So moved.
Jean, a second?
Second.
Mike, further conversation? Okay, then vote by roll call. Gina Stino,
Aye.
Mike Barclay,
Aye.
Fran Collins,
Aye.
Patrick Kennedy,
Aye.
Mark Maggi,
Aye.
Alan Marr,
Aye.
and Rob Hillman. I too am an aye, which brings us to,
Just one other note to Chris. The informational summary is really a mess on this. I don't know if that's getting attention before it gets published, but there's lots of typos and
and we have some,
misplaced words in this.
we have some work to do on it. Yes. Yes, that was,
okay, I believe that we voted Article 11.
Yep.
I believe we voted Article 12,
Yep.
civil service. I believe we voted 13, which are the cell towers on the water department tanks up the top of Bear Hill. And I believe we voted Article 14 on the citizen petition regarding sidewalks, which brings us to Article 15. Let me provide a quick recap and I'll turn it over to Chris to correct anything I get wrong in my recap. We had a lengthy discussion about this, and there were a variety of additional pieces of information, including potentially an opinion from council. My understanding, well, the select board has deferred recommendation to town meeting. There is no opinion from town council yet on this question, one way or the other. The select board was talking about having more proceedings and working with town council on a number of other things, leading me to think that perhaps we should defer as well because there's more development. My analogy, for what it's worth, is if we're building a bridge and the engineers weren't prepared to give us an opinion, we would defer our opinion on the bridge. And even though this is a little bit closer to what I'm comfortable with, I do think that people having subject matter expertise, it ought to be weighing in, but that's just me. Chris, can you either confirm that everything I said is fair and accurate, or undo what I just made a mess of?
You're always fair and accurate, Rob, so everything is fair and accurate. So the select board is the deferred recommendation until town meeting on this. There's going to be more conversations in public. There's an effort being made to set up a conversation on this publicly for right after Thanksgiving, trying to get a date. So the select board has not taken a position on this article. Again, pending more conversations. So, and this is complicated. This is a complicated issue that I should say this particular bylaw is part of a much more proposed bylaw is part of a much more complicated issue.
So I haven't exactly asked for or made a motion that we defer. I'm not sure we even need to move to defer, but why don't we just have a conversation? Either do people have, I think, a couple of categories, and just to consider would be, do we defer and ask for generally or specifically more information? Are people interested in voting on this tonight? Or do we, I suspect we will schedule a meeting prior to town meeting where we'll clean this up and the community preservation committee matters and other loose ends, as well as deciding which articles we may want to speak to at town meeting. So we're going to have a meeting. There might be a better developed record for us to consider this on. Jean?
I don't know how we can vote on something if we don't have the informational summary that is supposed to be provided by the petitioner. I mean, we can't approve it, certainly, or recommend it. I think that we have to wait until we have the summary.
Okay, Mike?
I'd echo Gene's comments, and based on what I heard at the select board meeting last night, my opinion is we should defer this.
I think Mike's characterization of last night's meeting, I watched it this afternoon. I think that's fair. Anybody else? So why don't we just take a position that we're going to defer a recommendation on this, and
Yep.
I'll try and get, if there's an opinion that is something that, we can look at. If it is, we'll distribute it. If it's a executive session matter, we'll executive session it. We'll ask for an informational summary. there was a discussion about maybe getting some documents from the bylaw passed in the fifties, but we'll see if they're available. And at some point, we'll make a decision or of some sort, recommend, don't recommend, or conceivably even possibly punting on it. But I think, well, we're going to defer it for now. Is everybody okay with that? Good.
Yes.
So we're done with the warrant. We have a standing entry on our, Ellen, your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. I went through and I looked at Articles 1 through 6, which are all spending articles. And, we discussed the increase in capital, but the net is plus 315,000 in spending from this week to last week. Is that all just free cash?
Chris?
No, so there was several projects in the capital budget proposal that are coming out of the capital fund directly. I mean, when I say that, I mean, they're covered. I mean, in the sense that we're putting 625 into the capital reserve fund. So it's more than the projects they're using. That said, no, there's no more free. We capped the free cash spend. Jennifer's estimate is about 1.5. So we said we can't go above that right now. So I believe this comes in about 1.4, if I did my math right. That's where we are. And if there's any extra, Jennifer's now since filed with the state, it'll be certified. We expect it'll be certified in time for town meeting. If there's any extra beyond that, we'll deal with it in the spring. It'll just be money for. I'm sure there'll be a line for for people looking to spend that. So.
Okay. All right, we have an agenda line for liaison. Patrick's already discussed Concom. I don't know whether Ellen and Jean, anything further on the schools front? It doesn't sound like it since last week. All right, anybody have anything else? Mike's already talked about capital budget. So I think we covered that agenda item embedded in the other discussion. We don't have minutes. In terms of scheduling upcoming meetings, I was going to propose special town meetings a little late this year, which gives us a little bit of scope, but we're not going to meet on Thanksgiving evening or the night before, I don't think. So I was going to suggest Wednesday, the 7th. It's the last Wednesday night prior to special town meeting. We can, if we don't know by then, we're not going to know. So we can wrap everything up. Does anybody feel like we need to have another meeting between now and then? Would people prefer to have a meeting on, say, the 23rd to get ahead of these things? I'm thoroughly agnostic as to dates. Do I take that as a preference for the 7th? Sounds good. We'll go with the 7th then. If there's any reason to change that, I'll circulate something, but I doubt it. And then topics not reasonably anticipated. I didn't anticipate any. So unless anybody else did, nope, hearing nothing. Chris, any loose ends out there that
no, I mean, I think you've already someone referenced in passing the waterman break. So I did thank everyone who worked hard on that. That was literally an 1870s era waterman. It had been relined in the 90s, so it hadn't been ignored. It had been relined in the 90s. And unfortunately, it broke in the worst possible place. It broke literally underneath the James Brook culvert, which runs underneath the street as well. The good news is it broke at 7:30 in the morning because everyone was on staff, everyone was there. They were able to address it fairly quickly, and it did get fixed. That said, the replacement of the other 1870s era water mains in that area are rising up the list. So I expect a proposal for the spring to figure out what to do with the rest of them. The only problem is that they're all in the village, right? They're all down there. So, and as John Joyce explained to me, this is pit cast iron, and Frank can probably explain that better than I can. But pit cast iron is just, it's different, and you don't, it doesn't show its flaws until it actually breaks. So it could last for a couple hundred years too, right? It doesn't mean, because one part of the pipe broke doesn't mean that the rest of it's bad. It doesn't mean that they're all. It just, there's just a degree of uncertainty that's clearly, you know, that clearly probably should be addressed sooner rather than later. And I don't mean that tomorrow, but in the next capital plan. So, but again, I appreciate everyone's patience as people dealt with that. And everyone handled it well. There was even a wedding scheduled for the Red Line on Friday. Everything went off okay. So,
Oh, good.
I had no panicked bride and groom in my office yelling about water. So everything went okay. So,
Well, it's good to know that we have good, you know, water systems from the Ulysses S. Grant administration. So that's, you know, all right. Yeah, unless there's anything else, Fran?
Ellen, thanks. I did see that PowerPoint on the drawings of the proposed fields. Thank you for sending that. I had seen that, but I was looking for something bigger, a whole, like a report. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, there's one more motion.
We'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Jean and Fran, all in favor, Gina Sino,
Aye.
Mike Barclay,
Aye.
Fran Collins.
All right.
Patrick Kennedy,
Aye.
Owen Mar,
Aye.
Mark Maggi,
Aye.
and Rob Hillman. I am an aye. We stand adjourned. Have a good November.